The Dershow.
So what is Rico? Rico requires that there be an enterprise called the mafia or called the drug cartel, that there be an enterprise, and that each individual defendant has to have committed several designated crimes. That's not enough, but he has to have committed them through the enterprise, using the enterprise as a way of committing those crimes. And the Supreme Court and the courts of appeals have reversed many RICO convictions because the government just used the word racketeering and the jury convicted, but they didn't dot their I's and cross their T's, and they didn't persuade the jury based on admissible evidence that the crimes, the designated crimes, were committed through the enterprise. That's what RICO is about. RICO was never, ever intended to apply to elections. Remember, so many elections in American history have been contested. You all saw Hamilton, so you remember the 1800 election, one of the most contested elections in history. The framers of the Constitution screwed up. They made a mistake. And in Article 2, they basically said that you cast electoral votes for a president and a vice president. And of course, at the time, there were no parties. Parties began toward the end of the Washington administration. And so when Burr runs for vice president with Thomas Jefferson against Adams, Burr and Jefferson get the same number of votes. They overwhelmingly defeat Adams. He had passed the Alien Sedition Act. He was unpopular. But Jefferson and Burr were tied. But Jefferson was running for president. Burr was running for vice president, but Burr, a man of no character, and the man obviously responsible for killing one of the greatest American statesmen in history, Alexander Hamilton Burr, said, hey, Jefferson, too bad. You know, I got the same number of votes as you did. I'm going to run. I'm going to be the president. The electors couldn't decide. So it was thrown into the House of Representatives, and it lasted for many weeks. And ultimately, of all people, Alexander Hamilton, who was a Federalist, that is, he hated Jefferson. Jefferson was his arch enemy. In fact, Jefferson was the one whose guy revealed the affair that Hamilton had with Mrs. Reynolds, which caused really the end of Hamilton's political career and ultimately led to his duel, because who do you think represented the woman in her divorce ultimately? Aaron Burr. I mean, it sounds like it's made up, but it's true. James Monroe was involved. Aaron Burr was involved. Jefferson was involved. Any event, Hamilton was a man of great character, and he could determine who the next president was going to be as between Burr and Jefferson. And he thought that Jefferson, although he disagreed with everything Jefferson stood for, he thought he was a man of character and principles. So he got the Federalists to cast their votes for Jefferson. Jefferson wins the election. Burr complained. Not only that, went down south, started his own army, was indicted for treason, tried before Chief Justice John Marshall. The jury refused to return a verdict of either guilty or not guilty. They returned a verdict of not proven, which put an end to Burr's career. But that was that election. Then there's Tilden Hayes, 76. I may have my dates wrong by 2 years. Deeply contested election. Ultimately was corruptly won by Hayes, as a result of a deal being made to end Reconstruction, essentially, and hurt formerly enslaved people. Terrible, terrible election. 2000, the 1960 election, the first election I voted in, Hawaii was deeply contested. And, you know, a court had the case, and the court said the way to contest an election is to come up with an alternate slate of electors and submit it to. That's what they did, pursuant to the law. And then we get, of course, to Bush versus Gore, where all of the same activities were conducted by the same people, by the way, Lawrence Tribe and others who did much of the same things that they now think Trump should be accused for. Utter hypocrisy. Well, they say there are differences. Of course, there are differences. There are never complete similarities between elections, but the similarities outweigh the differences. And so we saw that in 2000. Then we saw it in 2016, when Trump beats Hillary Clinton, loses the popular vote, beats her in a close election, my former student, Jamie Raskin, who was one of the people who headed the impeachment of Trump that I defended him on, Jamie Raskin gets up in front of the House and the Senate and asks for them to hold the process and do some of the same things that the Trump people asked them to do. But, people criticized Jamie Raskin, but nobody thought to indict him or indicate he was corrupt. Did Jamie Raskin honestly believe that Hillary Clinton won the election? No, I don't think so. He's a smart guy. I know. I gave him a very good grade. He was a very smart guy. I actually helped defend his father 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier, under the Espionage Act, the same act that Jamie Raskin now wants to expand to cover Donald Trump. We've had all these contested elections. This is the first time anybody has ever tried to use a RICO prosecution to go after a campaign, a political campaign. And so my analysis of this RICO case is that it will probably result in a conviction, particularly if it stays in the state courts, and particularly if it's in the same county, Fulton County, which is overwhelmingly Democrat. It will probably result in a conviction that will probably occur just before the election. It certainly won't occur within 6 months, but maybe within a year and a quarter. It could happen. And then it will be reversed on appeal when it gets to the United States Supreme Court. That's my prediction.